All right, let's talk about La Tomatina. You've definitely seen the pictures, right? Thousands of people just completely covered in red, throwing tomatoes everywhere in some Spanish town. It looks like the most amazing, chaotic party on earth. But yeah, there's a whole other side to this story that you probably haven't heard.
So, here's the big question that got me thinking. How is it that for Spain's most famous fun festival, the people who have the worst time are the locals? The very people who live there, who don't even take part? It's this huge contradiction, and it really tells you everything you need to know about what this thing has turned into.
Okay, so let's just lay it out. On one hand, you've got the image, the thing you see on Instagram, right? It's this joyful, once-in-a-lifetime party for tourists. But then, there's the reality for the actual residents of Buñol. For them, it's a massive headache. We're talking a huge cleanup job, tons of noise, and just total disruption. These two worlds, they just don't line up at all.
So, to really get this, we have to look at the part of the story that never makes it into the glossy travel guides. Let's talk about the hidden costs of this giant party, and who's really paying the price.
I mean, just try to wrap your head around the scale of this. We're talking about over 100 tons of tomato mush that has to be cleaned up in a matter of hours. The whole town just shuts down. And you can imagine, over the years, the locals have started to feel, well, pretty disconnected from it all. It's like their festival isn't really theirs anymore.
But here's the real twist in all this. Everyone talks about it being this old tradition, but what does that even mean? Because the origin story of La Tomatina is probably not what you think. It wasn't some ancient ritual or anything like that. The truth is, it's way messier, and honestly, a lot more interesting.
So get this. It all kicks off in 1945. There's a parade, some kids get into a fight, and they just happen to be next to a vegetable stall. So what do? They start grabbing tomatoes and chucking them at each other. That's it. The next year, the same group thought, hey, that was fun, and they came back, but this time they brought their own tomatoes. It was basically just a teenage brawl that kind of became a thing.
And this quote just nails it perfectly. It wasn't a festival given a meaning, but a brawl that was given meaning later. Think about that. The fight came first. The meaning, the whole festival idea, that was all bolted on way, way after the fact.
Okay, and this is where the story gets really wild. You have to remember this was happening under Franco's dictatorship in Spain, a super strict authoritarian regime. So how on earth did this chaotic, messy food fight survive? The answer is kind of brilliant. It survived precisely because it was meaningless. Think about it from the regime's perspective. They wanted total control. Everything had to have a purpose, a pro-government message. But La Tomatina, it had zero political slogans, no flags, no ideology. It was just people throwing tomatoes. So for the government, it was seen as this perfect, harmless way for people to let off some steam without actually threatening anything. Its complete lack of meaning was its superpower. It's what kept it alive. So that explains how it survived. But why tomatoes specifically, right? Was there some ancient tomato god they were honoring? Nope. The answer, again, is way more down to earth. It really boiled down to two simple things. First, location. Buñol is right in the middle of Valencia, which is basically tomato country in Spain, so there were tons of cheap, surplus tomatoes lying around. And second, and this is the most important part, tomatoes are soft. You know, if you start throwing rocks at people, the police show up and it's a riot. But if you throw tomatoes, it's just a food fight. It was the perfect weapon for a fight that wasn't meant to actually hurt anyone.
So we've got this accidental, meaningless brawl that somehow survives a dictatorship. How in the world does that turn into the massive, ticketed global event we see today? Well, that part of the story happened much more recently, and it happened fast.
You can pretty much map out the explosion. Step 1. In the late 90s, the international media finds it and labels it a quirky local festival. Step 2. Budget airlines pop up, making it super cheap and easy for anyone in Europe to get there. Step 3. The real game changer, social media. Suddenly it becomes this must-have photo for your feed. And finally, step 4. The town itself is so overwhelmed they have no choice but to start selling tickets and making rules just to control the chaos.
Which brings us to today. So what is La Tomatina now? Is it just a sellout, or is this just what happens when things evolve? Let's kind of tally up the score.
Okay, first, let's tackle the biggest complaint you always hear from people who aren't there, the food waste. How can they waste all that food? And look, it's a fair point, but the reality is a little different. The tomatoes they use for this are basically the rejects. They're overripe, not good enough to be sold in stores. They were probably destined for the trash anyway. So while it looks like a huge waste, the actual food being lost is pretty minimal.
And this, right here, is the great trade-off. What was lost? That original spark of rebellion, that spontaneous local fun, that feeling of just letting loose. That's mostly gone. And what's left in its place? A visually stunning show, a packaged experience you can buy, and something that looks amazing on Instagram.
At the end of the day, the festival has made a huge shift. It's not really a cultural celebration anymore. It's a tourism product, something that's been packaged, polished, and put up for sale.
And that really leaves us with a bigger question, one that goes way beyond this one town in Spain. Because this happens all over the world, right? When something authentic and local becomes a product for the whole world to buy, what's the real cost and who ends up paying it?